Hello, my name is Christopher Leon. I'm arguing for the legislation for the legalization of marijuana. Today, marijuana is classified as a Schedule I drug. With that comes a harsh stigma towards it and many uses with heavy punishments for its possession. But first, a brief history about the regulation of marijuana in the United States. Hemp farms have been operating in the United States since the beginning of the country in 1776 without regulation. The first regulation started with the hemp tax of 1937. This was to tax hemp farmers so heavily that the farmers would not be able to produce the plant for personal and public uses. This was ruled unconstitutional by the U.S. Supreme Court in the case Leary v. United States in 1960. A decade later, President Nixon, for his administration, made marijuana a Schedule I drug, with the admission that it was a political tactic to destabilize opposing factions of the anti-war and Black Power movements. One of Nixon's advisors, his name John Ehrlichman, said, and I quote, "There are two enemies of the Nixon administration. They are anti-war hippies and blacks. You can't make it a crime to be either, so associate hippies and blacks with pot and criminalize it heavily to disrupt both communities." He also said, "Did we know that we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did." Including marijuana, other Schedule I drugs include heroin and LSD. A Schedule II drug, for example, which is supposedly less of a risk to public safety and welfare, includes drugs like cocaine, Oxycontin, and methamphetamine. The definition of a Schedule I drug in the United States currently is A, a drug or other substance that has a high potential for abuse. B, the drug or other substance has no currently accepted medical use in treatment in the United States. And C, there is a lack of accepted safety for the use of other substance under the medical supervision. However, currently in the 44 states in the U.S. Have some sort of medical use law to help treat such illnesses, such as Parkinson's, symptoms of cancer, including pain and nausea, seizures, glaucoma, as well as many other symptoms too. Trevor here is a medical marijuana card holder of the state of Michigan. How does medical marijuana help you with the symptoms of your diagnosed stress and anxiety?
It basically helps me keep it under control. I feel anxiety a lot of the times, whether or not in public or in private, and it just helps me manage it to a, controllable point.
All right. And why did you decide to get a medical marijuana card?
Because currently the prescription medication available for stress and anxiety, things like Xanax, are not something that I think that I would like to enjoy, or things that I would enjoy. So I wanted to try marijuana, and I figured I should follow the legal channels for it.
Thank you for your time. Consequences of this classification have cost the government lots of money and has led to the incarceration of an extraordinarily high number of citizens. Today with me is Mary McAvoy. She is an attorney who has worked on sentencing reform with the Justice Project in New York City. Mary, can you briefly explain mandatory minimums and the three-strike rule?
Sure. Mandatory minimums and a three-strike rule are both sentencing guidelines. Mandatory minimums set the baseline for sentencing for a particular crime. And the three-strike rule was created so that people that were convicted of multiple felonies would not continue to be released back into society where they could continue to commit violent crimes. So after 3 felony convictions, a person is given a minimum mandatory sentence. Generally speaking, it's life in prison, but sometimes it's slightly less than that.
And how does this relate to marijuana?
So because of the classification of marijuana, there are often really harsh minimum sentences set. Mandatory minimums made it so that judges no longer had the discretion to give first-time offenders a lesser sentence or to take into account any of the other circumstances in the case. So it's in states like Michigan, where possession of even a very small amount of marijuana is a felony conviction, judges are required to give harsh sentencing, and with 3 convictions for even a minor amount of marijuana possession, um, there people can serve a very long to life imprisonment.
All right. Before the classification of marijuana as a Schedule One Schedule One drug in 1970, the total population of American prisons was at 357,000. 15 years later, by 1985, that more than doubled to 760,000 people. Currently, today, it sits at 2.7 million people. How have the laws related to marijuana impacted the rates of incarceration?
Well, they've made them skyrocket. 700,000 people a year are arrested for marijuana-related offenses, and generally speaking, the mandatory minimums were created to keep violent offenders off the street, but because they're in place for marijuana-related offenses, people are arrested. They have to go through the process of going through a trial, and then a lot of times are incarcerated, which produces a tremendous cost. 88% of people who are arrested for marijuana-related offenses are arrested for possession, and that, generally speaking, means that they have a small enough quantity on them that it's only for personal use. Even of the remaining 12% of marijuana-related arrests, a lot of times it's for manufacturing, which means people are growing. But even for that, a lot of people that are arrested are growing for personal use also. So these are not people who are have the intent to distribute, who are creating a product that goes into circulation. I mean, it's really about individual use, and there's a very limited harm to others associated with that. But taxpayers pay up to $10 billion a year just to process arrests and the going through a trial. That doesn't even take into account what's paid for keeping people incarcerated at such a high rate. So the expense to the country has just been astronomical, both in terms of the cost to individual families for the breadwinner, significant family member being removed from the family, but also just in terms of the amount of money that we're paying for to go through the arrest and conviction and incarceration process. And I mean, it would be remiss of me not to mention that there is a racial justice component to this as well. Constitutionally speaking, laws that disproportionately affect minorities are in a constitutionally gray area, and these laws, by and large, African American men are 4 times more likely to be convicted of marijuana-related offenses, and Latino men 2 times more likely to be convicted than a white person would be. So, I mean, that puts us in a really questionable area in terms of the legality of these regulations.
All right. Thank you, Mary. Thanks for your time.
You're welcome.
I'm going to be talking about how taxation of marijuana has created a massive money source for states like Washington and Colorado, and how that can be beneficial to us. So, according to Alan Pike, it turns out pot is a stronger economic driver than 90% of the industries active in Colorado. Legal weed created 18,005 full-time jobs and added about $2.4 billion to the state's economy last year. An analyst from the marijuana policy group MPG shows. Between the dollars that customers spend and the money business people invest in their crops and shops, pot is generating more wealth and activity than almost anything else on a pound-for-pound basis. Every dollar spent in the industry generates between $2.13 and $2.40 in economic activity. Only federal government spending has a higher multiplier. The 15% spending excess tax on marijuana sales in Arizona's legalization proposal would likely generate over $114 million in new tax revenue in 2019 and 2020, according to state fiscal analysts. That implies sale volume of over $760 million in 2 years, less than half the total revenue volume in Colorado's first 2 years. Even that compared comparatively slack rate of sales, though, could generate about $1.8 billion in new economic activity in Arizona if the multipliers from Colorado's economic experience prove typically of the industry elsewhere. State and local governments would see roughly $200 million in new tax revenue from pot taxes, standard sales taxes, and licensing fees for new cannabis businesses. Arizona's measure mandates that the bulk of that new money would go to schools, a provision copied from Colorado's referendum. Aside from the new job creation and economic activity, the state's K-12 systems would get an $86 million cash infusion over 2 years from legalization, according to the state fiscal analysts. The legalization measure in Maine would set a 10% tax on marijuana, though it's unclear if the state's 5.5% sales tax is included in that or tacked it on top of it. Fiscal analysts accompanying the measure suggest that state anticipates sale volumes between $69 and $107 million annually once the system envisioned by this year's ballot question is fully online. Behind every one of those sales dollars, there's spending it on payroll, construction, fertilizer, and other industry inputs. Legalization would generate hundreds of millions of dollars in new economic activity in a state that ranks near the bottom of the nation in total economic
Since the
output.
legalization of recreational use of marijuana in states like Washington, Alaska, and Colorado, some positive changes have occurred. Crime is down. Violent crime has been reduced by 2.2%. Burglaries are down 10%, and property crime has decreased by 9%. Arrests have dropped significantly by 84% since 2010. Preventing arrests for simple charges such as possession of marijuana. If you remember back to what Mary McAvoy said about how 700,000 people are arrested every single year for marijuana-related offenses, you can think about how each possession charge costs the taxpayers $300 per person to enforce and adjudicate. Lastly, in Colorado, revenues of marijuana have amounted to over $40 million. Some of that money is used to fund programs in schools and hospitals. However, most of it, about $30 million, will be going back to the pockets of the Colorado taxpayers. As we can see, legalizing marijuana will stop wasteful government spending on unnecessary incarcerations and provide revenue for important government programs. Thank you, and good luck on finals.